Hi, welcome back to the Night. In this chapter, we're going to look at the sixth move, Rook G1. Position arises after moves E4, C5, Knight F3, D6, D4, CD, Knight D4, Knight F6, Knight C3, A6, and here Rook G1. A very, very strange looking move. Of course, you generally don't develop your rooks this early and remove a possibility of short castle, but the move has a pretty straightforward idea. Push G4, and later after G5, when the H pawn starts moving forward, compared to the H3 line, which is a major line, looked at one of the previous chapters, White gets to push H4 in one go. Of course, this is all a little too optimistic. The variation is rather committal. White makes his plans rather obvious, and of course, this line hasn't been as popular as many others, but it's been around for a long time. Mamedov used to play it a long time ago, and it was always known as a very funky system. And recently, it's experienced another boost in popularity. Once a player started testing out different sixth moves, they've also turned their attention to the move Rook G1, and it's been played on a high level as well. Even Magnus Carlsen played it, although in a online Blitz event. So not clear how seriously he takes it, but certainly an interesting move. And upon my investigation, I've discovered that it's actually very playable, and I knew of this move, of course, also long before this recording. But it appears to be a lot more interesting than it looks at the first sight. Now, White obviously making such a committal move gives Black a lot of options here. There are really a lot of possibilities Black has. Now, I will once again recommend the move E5 here. It's the main move and also a good one, but there are alternatives. Now, E6 is not ideal. I mean, E6 is actually would be pretty terrible. Now, G4, G5, H4 works really perfectly. However, there are other options that are interesting. B5 is very interesting here. Normally, it's a little premature to play B5 this early, as it becomes a target for A4, but White also committed himself to Rook G1, so it makes a lot more sense here than anywhere else, and so B5 is interesting. I played it myself. There are other options. There is also possibility for the dragon setup. Rook on G1 is it's rather special. So G6 is interesting. Also, Knight C6 first is possible as well. White goes G4, then Black usually goes for G6 anyway, or perhaps H6 first. A lot of different different options, but also H5, by the way, is possible, immediately stopping G4 for now. But I would recommend the move E5. White plays Knight B3, of course. Placing the knight to another square would make a little sense. White needs to keep an eye on the G4 square with his queen. And here the old and the reliable line is simply Bishop E6 with the idea G4 D5. That also used to be the go-to solution. But there the play becomes relatively simple. White runs very little risk, and so I would also like to give an alternative, and that is the move H5. Rather committal, of course, weakening the G5 square, but so is Rook G1. Rook G1 is also a move which is very committal and only has one purpose, that is to push the G pawn forward, so it makes sense to stop that. So there are two options I would like to look at with you, so let's jump straight into it. Yeah, Bishop E6, again, more reliable. I think if you're playing an important game against a strong opponent, it's a decent option. White G4, now D5. And in fact, the Rook on G1 is not so bad here. After E takes D5, Knight takes D5, Knight takes D5, Queen takes D5, Rook is no longer attacked, so reasonable setup by White. Here White usually takes on D5, starting with Bishop E3 doesn't change very much. We play Knight C6 anyway, so take, Bishop E3, Knight C6. Both sides are preparing a long castle, which is what White does, long castle and long castle. And now we get a position which looks roughly equal, and also it is roughly equal, I believe. We want to finish our development. Bishop E7. Currently, also Bishop B6 is an idea. So if White makes a slow move, like let's say Bishop to E2, we can play also King C7 first, stop Bishop B6, and next we want to just develop our pieces, and endgame is roughly equal. Bishop b6 is a bit more critical. Now we play rook d6. We do have a threat of knight b4 potentially. Excuse me. And here white has a few options. White is fighting for a very small plus, but there is some potential there for him with a somewhat asymmetric pawn structure, and black's pieces not entirely coordinated just yet. So let's look at the different options. Rook g3 is the main move, but there are alternatives. So bishop c5, we can go back. We can also play rook d7, not allow the move repetition, but yeah, the position is around equal. After bishop c5, rook d8, also white doesn't seem to have anything better than going back to b6 and trying all over again. a3 has been played a few times, a direct attempt at stopping knight b4, but here black has a very good simplifying idea. Bishop takes b3, now that white has to double the pawns this way, neutralizing his queenside majority. So rook d6, bishop d6, cb. Position was very equal in the game of 480 against Sashi Kiran in 2016. Sashi Kiran played bishop d7 first, knight d4 immediately also does bishop d7 first, bishop d3, knight d4. Players agreed to withdraw soon. If white takes, we just have opposite colored bishops with a very equal position. Yeah, a3 bishop b3 allows basically direct equality, so white should do something else. Wesley So played g5 in online game against Duda. And here Duda played bishop e6, stopping bishop h3 check. And after rook d6, bishop d6, knight c5, Duda went on to defend the position after bishop takes c5. But in this particular version, bishop f5 is even more comfortable keeping the bishop pair with a roughly equal endgame. Slightly more challenging, at least according to the engine, is the move rook g3. It's not the most popular move yet, but being the first line of most of the computers, I guess it is the most critical move. Here black has a few options. Knight b4 though is not no longer any good. White plays bishop c5, and then the fact that the rook is on the third rank changes things quite a bit. So we shouldn't go bishop knight b4, but bishop e7 is pretty good. And here white should go g5. So possibly Wesley So has mixed up the move order. But here we go bishop e6. Again, bishop h3 check was a little unpleasant. And now white has of course a few options, but the most natural move is bishop g2, and here I can propose to take, or h6 first, the same thing, take h6, try to simplify the position a little bit, and after gh, rook h6, rook g7, rook h2, very little material is left, I believe, and yeah, of course the drawing tendencies are very high here. It seems that the position is heading in that direction very quickly. Very simple solution, in fact. So just bishop e6, g4, d5. I mean, white doesn't have any alternative really. The whole point of rook g1 is g4, and after g4, d5, white has to trade queens as well. So very easy, straightforward. But of course, as you had seen, the endgame is not offering black too many winning chances. So I want to also give another option. I mean, it would be strange if we play exciting double-edged chess against all kinds of lines, and against obscure move rook g1, we have to go for an endgame. So I'd like to give another option as well, of course, after e5, knight b3, h5. And the good thing is that there are other options, of course, that are correct. So h5 is one of them. Here white has a few options, basically two options. He can play bishop g5 immediately, or he can play h3 first. First of all, trying to get the g4 push in anyway, and also prepare a bishop e3 move, not to allow knight g4. Let's first look at the move h3. Here we play bishop e6. h3, by the way, was also the move that Magnus Carlsen played in one of these Blitz games that he played online. He played this variation against Sinan Sigurov. Bishop e6. Yeah, Carlsen played here bishop e3, which is the main move. But of course, let's look at g4 as well. Now, the difference is quite instructive. After HG, having traded the h pawns, our rook is now very active on the h file, and the endgame now is much more fine than it was there. After d5, d9, d5, knight d5, queen d5. Again, the same thing, queen d5, bishop d5, bishop e3, knight c6, long castle, but here the situation is far more comfortable for black. The rook on the h file is already in the game, and here black has no problems whatsoever and has a very comfortable endgame. So that's the idea of including h5. White, of course, doesn't have to play along. He can play differently. The queen f3 is a strange setup, honestly, but let's look at it. h4. h4 is often a good idea, slowing white's g4 push down a little bit. Bishop d2. Against bishop e3, we developed with knight d7, rook c8 as well, and now the problem with having the queen on f3 is that rook takes c3 will threaten to double white's queen side, which is pretty problematic if his king is on the queen side. Bishop d2, therefore, is a more sensible approach in this particular piece configuration. Here we got knight d7, long castle, rook c8 anyway. And yeah, there are many different ways of playing here with black, but let me just show you one example line. King b1, queen c7, g4, white has to try to push. Now we take on g3, slow white down quite a bit. fg3 and now b5, we're threatening already b4, c2 pawn is hanging. And after a3, knight b6, we have all sorts of ideas, d5, knight to c4, knight to a4, whereas white is a little bit slow here, yet to push g4, and after g4, d5 leads to very interesting complications. Also knight a4 is given as a good move. So all in all, queen f3, bishop d2, not a poisonous setup. Bishop e3, trying to go for the English attack setup is a lot more conventional, a lot more dangerous too. I recommend knight b7. Of course, we follow the usual scheme of development here with black. Knight to d7, and now there are, as we will see, there will be different ways of playing for black. Queen d2, b5. There are different nuances, different move orders, different options, but essentially, yeah, we want to play bishop to e7 and pawn to b5, one order or the other. B5, long castle, bishop e7. f4, white has to go for the f4 push, as g4 is no longer a sensible idea, as the pawn on h5 prevents that. So f4. This looks very similar, in fact, to this. If you remember, if you already looked at the English attack chapter, there was the chapter where we played h5, which was my recommendation, and then white went for the long castle plan, and then he went for h3, f4 setup. So very similar positions, if you remember, in fact. And yeah, the play again is similar. As you remember there, the idea option was to play knight b6, and the same here, queen c7, king b1, knight b6. Again, there were options. You can play rook c8 first, and instead of queen c7, also you can play, I guess, rook c8. But this works out quite well, a very concrete idea. Now we want knight c4 or knight a4. This typical, these typical Sicilian ideas. And here I look at two critical responses. f5 is one. Now we play dynamic knight c4. We don't have to waste time retreating. Knight c4 is strong, hitting the queen. Bishop c4, now we take with the bishop. And after g4, we of course continue with the tempo play. We play b4, don't let white to kick our knight away. After b4, white has to go knight d5, as the e4 pawn was in some trouble. Now we take knight d5, e d5, and continue with our play with a5. The idea is a4, targeting the b3 knight. Also d5 pawn is always weak, and white hasn't achieved all too much on the king side. And the line continues with g takes h5, a4, and now white has a very strong way to keep up and maintain the balance. Knight c5, very strong move. To dc, he has d6, simplifying operation, and that leads to equality. After bishop d6, queen d6, queen d6, rook d6, rook h5, lots of pawns are hanging, and with opposite colored bishops, the position is roughly equal. That is for 14 f5. 14 queen f2 is also very challenging. The idea is that after knight c4, white can now take, and after bc4, he has first of all bishop b6 idea. Also knight as the d2 square, so a very good way to prepare for knight c4. But here we have knight a4, and e4 pawn is suddenly in quite some trouble. White has to play knight d5, and now we take the bishop. E takes d5. and we send the second knight into the attack, knight e4. The knights are heading towards the c3 square, and as you can probably guess by now, we will sacrifice one of the two knights to establish the other knight on c3. Queen f3, the most direct, hitting the knight on e4. If white plays queen e1, we get the time for rook c8, and after rook c1 castle, and if white, of course, hits our knight with bishop d3, then we sacrifice it with similar ideas as you will see after 70 queen f3. Here we also sacrifice the knight e3, bc, e4, also possible to start with knight c3, it's the same. e4 is nice. If queen e4, we have knight c3, which is what they call a royal fork, I believe. Queen f2, knight c3, king c1. King protects the rook. And here we should maintain the knight on c3 for now. It's a very strong piece. We have sacrificed the piece already, so if we give the knight, if we take the rook for a knight, white will have two pieces for a rook, which is roughly equal material, but our knight is worth a lot more. It's a very strong attacking piece. You can also take the a2 pawn sometimes, so we should maintain that, play bishop f6, and activate our bishop. Now white can play bishop d4. White has to try to neutralize our attack. Our attack is very strong. We intend rook c8 followed by knight a2. Just our king, of course, is much more safe. Bishop d4 is the best. Bishop takes d4. Now I looked at two options. Rook d4, trying to make sure the rook is no longer hanging. Now we play castle. It's important to bring also the other rook into the game, and we have the time to castle. And after g4, I like the move h4, making sure that our king is tremendously safe. And next we want to play rook f to c8, and with a5, a4, start strong attack against the white king. And the fact that we are piece down is barely relevant here. Our pieces are so much more active, and we have so many potential for the attack here that the situation is quite dangerous for white. 22 queen takes d4 instead is a little safer for white. Now we play rook c8. We can keep the flexibility with the knight, threatening currently knight e2 check, followed by queen to mate. White goes king d2, forcing us to grab on d1, knight takes d1, queen takes d1, and now we give a check, king d1, short castle, and this is a very unbalanced position. We have a rook and a pawn for two pieces. The white remains with a rather weak king, and yeah, this messy position, according to the strongest computers, is roughly balanced, whatever that means. But I think black still has definitely the initiative and much safer king. So I take black here any day. Very strong idea. This knight a4, knight e4 business. That is for all for 8 h3. 8 bishop g5 is also an option. Perhaps the most tempting option. Of course, h5 weakens that g5 square, so the bishop gets developed immediately here. Now we play bishop e6. Again, we want to develop bishop e6, knight b7. That's the good thing about the neither, that in many different positions we can aim for a familiar setup, and while the variations are different, the positions are different, we still have these thematic ideas that we can employ. Bishop e6, queen 2, knight b7, long castle. And yeah, again, here there are different options and move orders. You can start with bishop e7, b5, rook c8 in random order. Can also try something creative, which is what I will recommend. I'll recommend to play b5 and omit this move bishop e7. Now the main idea is that after king b1, which is a universally useful move, we have this b4 push, and that is a theme in this particular line. After knight d5, we have now knight takes e4, hitting the queen. After bishop d8, knight takes d2, rook takes d2, we take on d5. Both bishops are hanging. Black is currently a pawn up. White can win the pawn back with bishop a5. The bishop is still attacked. The b4 pawn is hanging. But after bishop e6, bishop b4, d5, we have very strong pawn center, and with equal pawns, I believe it's black who is being very comfortable here with a strong pawn center. We'll see similar positions also after the most critical move 11 f4. If 11 bishop d3, some very spectacular things can happen before knight d5, a5. With bishop not on e7, we can ignore the knight for now. If white takes, we take. We have a4. A4 is a very strong threat. Here white has actually a brilliant way of dealing with our a4 threat. It's bishop b5, a4, and now knight c5. A very beautiful trick, but only enough for maintaining the balance after d takes c5. Bishop f6, gf6, knight f6 is the point. King to e7 now. Queen f6 would lose to, queen f6 would lose to bishop takes d7. There would be issues. Now king e7 is very strong. Note that if white just grabs the piece with knight d7, we have a bishop h6, which is a very nasty threat, winning the queen. And so white is forced to give a check. Now if we take, white takes with the queen, and we have problems once again. So we go back, and after king e8, white has nothing better than knight f6 check, and then we go back. So, a very unusual move repetition, but I believe that this would never happen unless white knows this. Just very unusual tactic, bishop b5, a4, knight c5. The most critical move is 11 f4. Now bishop e7 transposes to, well, it doesn't transpose to anything we looked at. Basically, it would mean the same as bishop e7 first, f4, b5, bishop d3. Now this is a serious tabia that I looked at in quite some detail, but it's not so simple for black. Oftentimes after b4, white sends the knight to the center with knight d5, and then things get very messy. Instead of that, I've discovered an interesting idea to avoid it and play 11 b4 first directly. Even with the king on c1, we still have this knight d5, knight takes e4 trick. Even with knight takes e2 not being a check, it's still very valid. In these complications, this endgame I believe is roughly balanced from my analysis. That was my conclusion. Bishop takes d8, knight takes d2, bishop a5. White wants to keep his dark square bishop, and he will win back the pawn obviously at any moment. So we take on d5 with the bishop. Now white can take on d2 with the knight or with the rook. If he takes with the knight, we play bishop e6, bishop e6 back. We want at some point to push d5. And after bishop d4, we play f6, reinforce the e5 pawn. And next we want to push d5 and have that strong pawn center. I believe this is around equal. 15 rook d2 is also critical now after bishop e6. White has two options. Bishop b4, of course, is the most natural. We'll look at that in a minute. But there is also 16 g3 move. And the idea is white wants to develop quickly, bring his rook to the center. Now d5 would fall into all sorts of things where white is up in development. Instead, the computers have just a very strong idea to deflect the f4 pawn from the center with a brilliant move g5. It's not the only move, by the way, but it's very cool. Now f takes g5 is the normal follow-up. And now it's possible to play d5 here. There are some complications, I believe, after bishop g2, e4 that lead to balanced game as well. But I like the move h4. And after bishop b4, d5, bishop f8, king f8, we are pawn down, but we have tremendous pawn center, and this white's pawn chain, or well, I wouldn't call it a chain, but pawn, I don't know, clamp, or how to call this pawn configuration. Basically, it is broken. The h2 pawn is going to be backward and weak. The g5 pawn is, on the contrary, overextended and also weak. So the position is roughly equal. We have tremendous compensation for the pawn. It is basically equal. 16 bishop takes b4 is the most natural, and now we take on f4. Of course, here after d5, we no longer have that pawn center. White will take, and we have isolated pawn on d5. Instead, e takes f4 is the way. And after bishop takes d6, bishop d6, rook d6, the f4 pawn might seem weak, but it's actually an asset. It's a very forward pawn, and we have 4 against 2 majority here on the king side, which counts for something, especially after a strong move king d7. King is very strong in the center. Rook a6 turns out to be not so simple. After rook a6, bishop a6, rook a8, we win back the pawn. And so white's best bet is to retreat. Now we go g5, h4, f6. We keep our f4 pawn, and next we want to play knight e5 and rook a d8. And it's going to be a race, very likely, with white having a queenside majority and black having this kingside majority. And from my analysis, as I continued to look this position a little bit further, just to make sure it's fine, black is indeed very fine, and pawn race is quite balanced. I believe that that covers our rook g1 journey. Again, I give two options: e5, knight b3, the simple bishop e6, d5, which leads to very simple endgame, and the more complicated h5. Of course, our analysis went eventually into an endgame, but of course, in the real world, your opponent is likely to do something else before, which is not going to be very good. And then we have our usual bishop e6, knight d7, typical Najdorf play on the queen side. And also the endgame in this line is much more double-edged than the one after bishop e6. So I think it's your choice. And of course, again, as always, I don't limit you to what I recommend. And if you're looking for alternatives, certainly do investigate d5, h5, knight c6, g6. All of these moves. It's just e6, g4 that we shouldn't fall for. That was that. 6 rook g1. Hope you had fun. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next chapter.